Okay, welcome to the 2022 beginners course. Session 1, Zoom warning. So we are being hosted by kind permission of Morag MacDonald, who is a member of the group. She has very kindly offered us the use of her Zoom. If the audio quality degrades, you may have to reboot your Zoom, in which case close it down, reopen it, and enter the 2 ID codes, and I will invite you back ASAP. So, if you've been on a course courtesy of your company, you will know that the procedure usually is that there is a health and safety issue mentioned right at the beginning. And it usually goes something along the lines of, if the alarm bell should happen to go off, please make your way out of the building via the fire exit. Well, obviously, I've got no idea where your front door is or your back door. So in the very, very unlikely event that a fire alarm goes off, you know what to do. So health and safety leads me on to bee fever. And I have to warn you now, I am badly infected and have been for quite a number of years. It's a non-medical condition, but unfortunately, it's incurable. Highly infectious, it leaves the sufferers with a social disorder called bee bore, unable to converse socially for more than 3 minutes before blatantly moving the conversation back to the bees, and then droning on for hours about them, especially your own. As I say, I've been infected for quite a number of years, which makes me unfortunately rather good at it. So, who am I? Well, my name's Pete Watt. I've been interested and keeping bees for 35 years now and counting. My current stock is 6 nucleus, which is baby colonies, and 14 full-strength colonies. My numbers fluctuate as I get swarms coming in or I create nukes, so on and so forth. So the numbers are a sort of rough guide. It's round about where I like to sit. 14's possibly a little on the high side. 10's probably about enough for me. But, you know, as I say, it rises and falls a bit. Now, something to be aware of is that a 1 hive owner gets 1 bee year experience per year. The 100 hive owner gets 100 years experience per year. In other words, he gets 100 times more experience than the person with 1 hive. So the expert who's kept 2 for 10 years has got 20 bee years of experience. Now, the thing is, of those 20 years, the vast majority are probably identical. It's only when you've kept a number of stocks for a number of years that the aberrations crop up and you become aware of them. And more to the point, how to deal with them. Now, I did a training course some couple of years ago, and as part of that, I was told that you, as somebody who is stepping up and teaching, you need to validate. So here's my initial validation. I sat my Scottish Bee Master certificate, which I do think is a rather pretentious name, to be honest, for the most junior of the certificates to be a Bee Master. Whoa. Anyway, did that in 1989. And then some years later, in 1995, I did the Scottish Beekeepers Bee Expert Bee Master certificate. The expert certificate these days is a bit more difficult, to be fair. There's a number of modules that have to be done. Back in my day, it was a practical, it was a 3-hour paper, and it was, there was a third part to it. Oh yes, an inspection of the beekeeping equipment. Mine went like this. I did the 3-hour paper. A gentleman came to see me and went to see the bees. We I took him to an apiary where there were 40 stocks sitting. He looked at them, he said, well, I don't suppose you can tell me what's going on with any one of these. I said, of course I can, just point at one. So we pointed at one, lifted the lid. I said, right, here's the record card. We've done this, we've done that, done the next thing, super's on, super's off. I said, right, okay, fine, thank you. He said, I better see your extraction place. I said, okay. So I took him back to the house, took him round the back, opened the door to the honey house, and he took one look and he said, right, that's good enough for me, because I had equipment he hadn't even set eyes on before. So not boasting, but my expert was relatively straightforward. So backstory. Oh yes, everybody's got a backstory. My first wife, in 1986, we were having a chat about family history, and she happened to mention that her grandmother had kept bees. And Granny Finlay was one of those classic indomitable women. And she didn't drive, but she kept about 40 hives of bees. And during the war, World War II, honey was not on the ration, but sugar was. So two things came out of that. One was that if word got out in Stonehaven that Granny Finlay or Mrs. Finlay had honey for sale, there was a queue used to grow, and apparently it went right round the block at times. And if you know Stonehaven, the blocks just off the market square are quite big. The beekeepers at the time were given what they called, if I get this right, denatured sugar. And what they did to it was they dyed it with a green dye. And quite a few beekeepers got a real shock as to where that green dye actually turned up inside the colonies, because a lot of them back in the day used to work what is now called, or I suppose it was called then, brood and a half. And we'll talk about that down the line. But they found this green where they didn't really expect to find it. So they got a bit of a lesson or an eye-opener into how bees move things around the colony. Mentorship. I can't repay the people that gave me a great deal of help in my early days, because they are either no longer with us or they've retired. But one of them said to me during a phone call, he said, look, Pete, he said, I can't repay the people that gave me a hand. He said, I'm repaying them by passing on what I know, and people who are keen tend to get decent mentorship, because the mentor gets feedback and feels validated, I suppose, to an extent. So the reason I'm running the course, and the reason I ran the course last year, is I am paying back my mentorship by passing on to others. I'll mention Craibston. Nowadays, we have the Scottish Agricultural College, SAC. When I started out in the mid-80s, there were 3 agricultural colleges. They were interlinked, but there was the East, the West, and the North. And the North of Scotland College of Agriculture, their beekeeping unit was called Craibston. And at each of the colleges, there was a bee advisor who had responsibility for his area. And he was qualified to the NDB level, although some people somewhat unkindly call it no damn bees, but it's the National Diploma of Beekeeping. And the thing about Craibston is it was in its day a fairly important research centre. One of the principal bee diseases was identified there back in the 1920s. Rennie did considerable amount of research into wintering. Another gentleman, Anderson, designed and invented, if you like, the Glen beehive, which we'll talk about later on. So Craibston had a pretty hefty track record behind it. And Bernard Mobus was at the time the bee advisor there, and he obviously saw something in me. In the mid-80s, beekeeping was very much in the doldrums. People were retiring, selling off hives. You could actually buy a hive back then for literally a tenth of what they cost now. And Bernard was forced by the college into taking early retirement. But he was worried that the whole Craveston thing was going to collapse, although eventually it did. And he asked me if I would consider taking it on a commercial basis. So I, in my very early days, went from wintering, I think it was about 6 or 7 stocks, to the following spring, finding I was running the best part of 50. Pardon me, and trust me, that is a jump. So I'll mention Craveston in passing as we move on, but it was a very important part of my beekeeping story. Bernard Mobus effectively invented the open mesh floor, and I'll mention that further down the line because it is important, because every man and the dog nowadays more or less has them, but they don't understand the relationship between the floor and the insulation. Anyway, moving on, the outline of the course is as follows. Week 1, introduction and costs. And week 1 is also the week where I'm going to mention quite a few of the drawbacks. And if you survive what I tell you this week, then next week, we're going to talk about hives and bees. The week after will be the bee as an individual. That's the worker bee, and the colony. That will be a year's overview. Week 4 is the nasty one. It's the one I hate doing, but it's pests and diseases, and there's knowledge there that you have to have. Week 5 is the bee year overview again, and I will tell you some tips and tricks. Week 6 is all about sex, otherwise known as swarming. Week 7 is where do bees get nectar from, floral sources, honey handling, jarring, labeling, legislation, and wax. And wax is something that is vastly underrated, and it is a valuable substance. Please bear that in mind. Week 8 basically will be open mic. I'll do a quick recap, and then we're just going to sit and chat about bees and thoughts you've had. And I'll also say that eventually, not eventually, if you haven't already given me your email, please do, and I will use that to send you out information. On the Facebook group in the files, you will find articles by Bernard Mobus, you'll find articles by myself, and it would be vastly helpful, being brutally honest here, to read. I know not everybody learns by reading, but even if you skim through and get a handle on the terminology like floor, brood box, and so on, you'll find what I'm telling you a lot easier to understand. Having said all of that, let's launch into what is beekeeping. My definition is, it is the art and skill of guiding honeybees to an outcome both bees and keeper are happy with. If your bees are unhappy, trust me, they will let you know, and it will be painful. And if they happen to catch you in the wrong spot, it will be very painful. And preferably, we're going to keep bees with no drama, but please be aware, bees can and do kill. It can be people, it can be livestock, but multiple stings coupled with, or even one sting can set off anaphylactic shock, the outcome can be very serious. Bees are not things to play with. So when we're talking about honeybees, what are we actually talking about? Not this lady, she is a bumblebee. And bumblebees and wasps are simple social insects. In fact, if you delve into bumbles, they're not actually bumbles at all, as in B for Bravo. They are humblebees, H for hotel. And they are called humblebees because they are simple social insects, and the life cycle is as follows. The colony towards the end of its life, at its most prosperous point, produces virgin queens who fly and mate, and they find a hidey hole and they go through the winter as a single hibernating insect. In the spring, they start to build a nest, and they work that nest by themselves until such time as they've produced enough workers to give them a hand. And at that point, obviously, they build up a bit more rapidly. Bumbles or humbles tend to max out round about 500 individuals in a nest. Wasps obviously go to several thousands, but they both have the same life cycle. And here's our friend the wasp. That bee the wasp, and this bee a honeybee. And you notice she's got pollen in our pollen basket on the hind leg. So very quickly and in brief, honeybees are advanced social insects, and they go through the winter with a population starting round about 30 to 25,000, give or take, and they come out the other end of winter, if they survive, with a population of about 15 to 20,000. The point being that when the queen starts to lay, she has got all those thousands of workers there to support her. And she quite rapidly builds up the nest to the point where the queen is laying 1,500 eggs a day, if not more, and she has the population to support that output. And because of that, a prosperous bee colony will build up to somewhere in the region of 50,000, 70,000 workers. And that is why they can achieve what they do achieve if they get the weather in their favor. More of that later. So is beekeeping a relatively modern thing? Not really, no. 2400 BC. This tablet here is showing a beekeeper working hives, which are actually in clay pots, and you can see the bees flying here. And this gentleman here is offering honey as a tribute to an Egyptian god. 14 metric tons was the offering to the god. So the Egyptians were pretty good beekeepers, and they were actually migratory beekeepers. And with a nod to Samuel Plimsoll, who was the guy that invented the white lines that you see in every merchant shipping vessel in the world nowadays, they also invented a system of measuring how far into the water the raft that the bees were on was settling. And by measuring how far down that raft was settling every day, they could work out what sort of a honey flow they were on. It was that prolific, apparently. It gushed. And the nectar coming in was obviously heavy enough to increase the weight, and down the barge went. So there's a few things that we think we've sort of invented, but not really. And here in the Borders, which is where I'm based, back in the day, there were 4 abbeys. There was Dryborough, where Sir Walter Scott is buried, and also Earl Marshal Haig from the First World War. There is Melrose, there is Kelso, and there is Jedburgh. So there would have been a lot of bees in this area. Now, why were the monks keen to keep bees? Well, several reasons. They had a profound belief in virgin birth. They didn't understand a lot about bees because it was skep beekeeping, and they didn't know even that there was a queen. They thought there was a king. That wasn't sorted out until Huber came along in the 1700s, I think it was. They also were very keen on beeswax for their candles, not just the religious candles on the high altars, which were pretty big candles, still are, but also for the light quality of beeswax candles, which were the best that you could get, for working in the scriptorium and doing the illustrated writing that they are so famous for, and rightly so. Honey, of course, was literally the only sweetener that was available. Sugar hadn't been invented. And as a sort of side event from the honey, obviously the bees were producing more honey than the monks could reasonably eat. So they had to do something with the excess. Mead. And that's another side of beekeeping that's quite a lot of fun. Right, moving on. Personal protective equipment. Right. This is a fact of beekeeping life. If you decide to keep bees, you are accepting that you are going to get stung. It both hurts and can be fatal, as I mentioned. A good veil is an investment. Now, there's all sorts of styles of veils. There's what they call the fencing veil, which is what I use, but I have a hat inside, and the hat keeps the veil, which is quite a floppy thing, away from the ears, very painful. Tip of the nose, makes your eyes run. Forehead, ooh, that's a nasty one because there's no flesh there, eh? Tip of the chin, painful. Actually, they're all painful, but some are more painful than others. You can have the veil alone, you can have the veil attached to a jacket, you can have a full bee suit, you can have a jacket and a pair of trousers. The trouble with the jacket and the trousers is when you bend forwards, you can get that tempting little gap between the waistband of the trousers and the bottom edge of the jacket. And then you find yourself with the beekeeper's dilemma as you go cross-eyed. Is that bee outside the veil or inside the veil? Well, trust me, sometimes it's inside the veil, which is where it seriously pays to check your zips, but I'll come to that again. Another thing that people discuss at great and vast length is wearing gloves. I do wear gloves for the simple reason, if you don't, your hands get covered in a substance called propolis. Bees collect 4 things. People think it's 3, but it's actually 4. They collect water, they collect pollen, they collect nectar, and they collect propolis. And propolis is that sticky gum that you see, especially on gean trees or wild cherry trees or pine trees sometimes. Pardon me. It's a resin exuded from the trunk of the tree. You touch it and you'll find yourself stuck to the tree, pretty much. Bees have this wonderful ability to collect it, take it back to the hive, and they use it as a natural antiseptic. They cover the inside of the hive walls with it. They use it in the cells. They have, say, a trapped mouse that dies inside the hive, they will actually cover the body in propolis to seal it off from the rest of the colony. I've seen it. And the thing about propolis is if you get it on your fingers become really sticky. Well, okay, I can live with that, but if I want to pick up a queen and my hands are all sticky, I'm going to damage her wing when I pick her up. And worse, when I try to set her down again, she can't get free. She's stuck. So that's why I wear gloves. And if I need them off, I put my hand on the ground, I put my foot on the end of the fingers, and I pull my hand out. And I then use my hand, bare hand, to pick up the queen. But anyway, so stings. Recently, I had carpal tunnel surgery. And I had a wonderful surgeon called Mrs. Davidson. And she said to me several times, because she gave me a few injections. She said, it won't hurt any worse than a bee sting. And after I'd had 3 of them, I said to her, look, I said, you really, with respect, you're going to have to stop saying this because it's just not true. And she looked at me. I said, I'll send you a little picture. Sharpest needle known to man is the blue thing. The red thing with the serrations and the rapier tip. Guess what? Bee sting. Why is it serrated? It's serrated so when it goes in, it stays put. You can't easily pull it out. And it's also there so that the bee will wrench itself away and leave behind the pollen sac. And when you get stung, you will see on your skin a little blob about half the size of a match head. Now, the temptation is to grab it between finger and thumb and squeeze it. Don't, because all you're doing there is injecting the rest of the venom out the venom sac into you. Use your thumbnail, credit card, hive tool, something with a nice sharp edge to it, and you scrape it out. As in, scrape like that. Right, carrying on the theme. Bees will sting you at the most awkward times, you better believe it. Anaphylactic shock. You hear about people who take that proverbial mouthful of soda pop out of a tin and a wasp is inside, stings the back of the throat, and the next thing is that person is in serious trouble because unbeknownst to them, they have a reaction to wasp venom. The weird thing about beekeeping and anaphylactic shock is somebody like myself who's been stung thousands upon times, I never know if the next time is going to provoke something really nasty. So let people know what your plans are and what your timings are. Have your phone within reach and check your veil is shut. Develop a little checklist. I put my bee suit on. First thing I do is I check that I've shut the zips round my boots. Then I check I've taken the center zip up above the line of the zip that goes across the way. Then I have the 2 zips attached to the veil. I bring them round. I have a Velcro tab on my chest. I make sure that's pressed tight and that acts as an extra seal between the 2 zips coming, if you like, nautical style thwartships and the longitudinal zip up and down the chest. So make sure you are zipped up. If you work with a partner, get in the habit of checking each other. Be like astronauts or divers. They always do a buddy check of their gear. And there's a damn good reason for it. For them, it's staying alive. And for you, guess what? So, insurance. The National Association in Scotland is called the Scottish Beekeepers Association, and you get insurance included in your £40 per annum at the moment membership fee. Local associations are usually affiliated to the SBA, and they also benefit from that insurance. Talking about the associations, we've just said the SBA, £40, you get a monthly magazine, plus the disease compensation, plus the insurance. Local associations vary in their fees, but roughly speaking, £15 to £20 per annum. Just be aware, some local associations are excellent and some are less so. You pay your money, you take your chance. Now then, our old friend, the internet. Now, I've been around the internet for quite a long time. In fact, when I started, I paid £140 for dial-up for 3 months. Seriously, I did. So I have been around the web for a bit. The majority of beekeeping forums and YouTube videos are not from the UK. What works well in New Mexico or Australia is very likely to badly fail here. Now, bear in mind, in Scotland, we are in the northern area of beekeeping in the world. We are very, very marginal. So, we have a short season, shorter even than, say, Devon. And the beekeeper that I know of up in Shetland has an even shorter season than what I used to have in the northeast of Scotland and what I have here down in the borders. So, you know, climate has a massive impact on beekeeping. It is the primary element that we have to contend with. And we live in a maritime climate, not a continental climate. Australia effectively has a continental climate, so does North America, and it makes a massive, massive difference. Aberdeen, same latitude as Moscow. And look at the trouble that Napoleon got into. I was in Niagara one year in January. It was snowy, it was -16, and I couldn't make a snowball for love nor money because the snow was too dry. Tried to pack it together and it just went poof, dust. I came back to Scotland. I was down in Stonehaven Beach at +2. And I'll tell you, in all seriousness, I was colder at +2 than I had been in Canada at -16. What's the difference? Wet. It was a damp, wet +2. And it felt, with a wind chill, miserable compared to the lovely, dry -16. Another time I was in Canada, I was cycling in Ontario and I happened to spot a sign saying bee farm. I thought, yeah, I'll stretch the legs and have a look. So I went in, lovely chap, had a conversation, and he showed me a skep of bees. And I'll talk about skeps when we talk about hives, but skep is the classic illustration you'll see on honey labels. You know, it's the basket shape. He started this skep with a queen cell and a shake of bees, which is basically one comb shook into the box or into the skep. Somewhere around about the beginning of June, last week in May. I was there third week in September. This colony was very prosperous, sitting on a set of bathroom scales, 112 pounds in weight. If you'd set that off in Scotland, oh, by the way, third week in September in Ontario, it was 28 degrees centigrade. I mean, balmy, you know, lovely. If you try to do that in Scotland, you'd have been very, very lucky if they'd got somewhere close to 20 to 30 pounds at best. Different ball game altogether. Now then, beekeeping, unfortunately, is very, very slow to move on. A lot of people get sort of stuck. They won't listen to things that have changed. They won't listen to research. They won't listen to, you know, progress. So, I like to think I'm a little bit ahead of that, and I'm going to try and tell you some things that are not possibly what some of the other people would say, but, you know, if it works, it works. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are so hidebound that you'll say, well, have you tried this? Oh, that won't work. So no. And they are adamant, absolutely adamant. And the unfortunate thing about a lot of the beekeeping books, although it is changing a bit now, is that the authors have put stuff in because it was in the books that they read when they were starting out. And stuff that they put in the books, they parrot it. They've never actually tested it. So we'll talk about or mention these things as we move on. Now, Facebook, where we all met. There are some good Scottish Facebook groups. There are some good buying and selling groups. The Scottish Beekeepers have a group, and obviously my group, Scottish Beginners and Improvers. Again, internet warning, you know, just because somebody says it is so on the internet doesn't mean to say it's true. It'd be nice if it was. And there are people out there who delight in making things up and telling lies. Sad but true. I have a website, polyhive.info /. There was a gentleman called Dave Cushman who died some years ago, and his two joys in life were beekeeping and computer coding. He built a wonderful site which still exists, although unfortunately it has been modified, not necessarily for the best. But Dave always said his site was open source. So on his death, I took a copy of it. Now, Dave, from a beekeeping point of view on his website, he wanted everything that existed on the site. He wasn't particularly bothered if it worked, if it was beneficial or non-beneficial. If it existed, he wanted to have a record of it, which was a laudable aim on its own. I took his material and I stripped it back to what I know works and works well. And if you look through what I have on the Polyhive site, you'll see that I have notes at the bottom of some of the pages, and I have color-coded those notes so that if I have modified it, it's clear, and if it's unmodified and is all Dave's voice, it's clear as well, which I think is only right and fair. And I like to think that my site is still a tribute to Dave. He was a lovely man, and I actually attended his funeral. So, you'll find the Bernard Mobus articles on wintering and swarming, which are both on the Polyhive info site, and they're also on the, or in the files folder on the Facebook group. Avenues of beekeeping. Different people obviously have different interests. The majority, I think, start out of a sense of wow. My sense of wow came from my wife's story about Granny Finlay, because she didn't drive, as I mentioned, and once upon a time, the family had to go and help her get honey off the bees which were sitting on the raspberry fields beside Montrose. Back in the day, there was a lot of raspberry in Montrose because Hartley's, I think it was, had a jam factory there. So the plan was to run a small vehicle back and forth to the big vehicle from the hives with the boxes of honey, the supers, and in the big vehicle, they had the extractor. So they extracted the honey, and there was quite a lot of it, 40 hives, being, you know, a few £100. So they finished up, drove home, parked the vehicle on Margaret Street, which is just off the main square in Stonehaven. And if you know Stonehaven at all, you'll know that the streets there can be quite steep. And they parked the vehicle facing down the hill, which you did in those days in case you had to do a quick bump start. So they went in, had a wash up, had a cup of tea, because extracting honey is a very hot, sticky, hard work. It's not everybody's favorite job, to be honest. And the boys went out to get hold of the honey tank, take it inside because they were going to be jarring the next day. Shock, horror, gasp, the valve on the tank had opened and most of the honey was in the front of the vehicle. Now, my wife's mother, Jean, bless her, told me that she drove the vehicle back to the bees, and it was horrible because every time she double declutched, which you had to in them days, her feet were in the honey and she'd taken her shoes off to do this. because she wasn't going to ruin her good leather shoes. Following day, they went back to pick up the van and all the honey had gone, apart from an old-fashioned, well, I mean, a perfectly normal toolbox then, but the toolbox which had the two lids, one went that way, one went that way, and there was a little sticky up lug that you could put a padlock through. The bees hadn't been able to get into it. The honey was in there, but everything else bone dry. And I thought to myself, ooh, that's a bit impressive. So, honey production. People get interested in producing bees, creating nukes, raising queens, and royal jelly is not so popular as it was. It was a fad, as the ladies no doubt will remember, where royal jelly was in everything. People get very intrigued by anatomy, which in itself includes microscopy, and microscopy also is involved in pollen analysis. And every beekeeper, whether they're really aware of it or not, becomes interested in botany, because where is the nectar coming from? I had an experience when I was down in Castle Donington in the Midlands. I had a honey flow that appeared out of nowhere, and it was an absolute cracker. And I thought to myself, where's this coming from? So I went for a walk, and I'd had bees on the site for 5 years, and it turned out I had 28 big lime trees within 500 yards of the bees. Now, lime is an odd one. You can have lime in full flower and not a dribble of nectar comes off it, or nothing to any sort of degree. And the story goes that lime likes wet feet. And what that really means is if there's been a really wet winter and then the conditions are right for a nectar flow, lime can be very profuse, and profuse indeed it was. It gushed. And the thing about a nectar flow is if you have warmth and wind, it can dry the nectar up. If it's cold and wet, forget it. It's not going to happen in the first place. If you have high humidity, no wind, and the right conditions for a plant like lime, you can have a phenomenal crop. I set my benchmark record that year. One colony produced 230 pounds of comb honey. I doubt I will ever manage it again. But it was a unique set of circumstances, and it was an experience. Moving on. If you do decide to start, if I haven't managed to put you off until by now, I'm not actually trying to put you off. I'm just making you aware of the realities. So the first thing, get stung. This is before you've spent money. Get stung, preferably under supervision. See into a live hive and decide if you're happy or not. I've seen people back in the day at Craibston when I ran the evening classes, beekeeping evening classes for Grampian region. I used to follow that on with a beginner's course. And it was really quite odd and sad in a way to see people who had been really enthusiastic right through the evening classes walk up to a live hive and just say, ooh, I don't think so. But that's a valid and a normal reaction. It's not going to be for everybody, and to a large extent, well, thank goodness it's not, because otherwise we'd be awash in honey and the price would collapse. So once you've decided that you are interested, that's when to think about dusting the moths off the wallet. So let's look at the pennies. The startup costs. Well, we all have to start somewhere. A timber hive, and these are cedar prices, pine is a bit cheaper. A timber hive, floor, BB, abbreviation for brood box, super, 3 of, roof, that's not including the crown board, coming out £183.85. Now, I should have modified this slide, so apologies. 2 years ago, the poly hive with the same 3 supers was £103.28. It's now £190.48. So it's gone back up quite a bit. All the prices are going up at the moment. Polystyrene's going up, timber's going up. Smoker, queen excluder, hive tool, those sort of sundries are often cheaper on eBay. I'm going to mention cheap quite a lot. Beekeepers are notoriously tight-fisted. Some of them almost obsessively so. But buying from the big supply houses is not necessarily the cheapest way to go by a long chalk. For instance, some years ago, I bought a nail gun, small electric one, from one of the big supply houses. I had a lot of trouble with it. It ended up jamming and I got fed up. So I went to Screwfix, and lo and behold, exactly the same thing was in Screwfix, literally half the price. So it really does pay to look around, double check, and see what's what. Today's prices, Maysmore poly, as I said, £190.48. National Beekeeping in cedar, £245. Cedar's up and poly is up as well. So savings. If you can do a bit of even very basic DIY, and most bee stuff is quite simple to make, you can save a lot of money. Make your own crown boards. They're almost £10, and they always come with 2 holes. I'll go into these holes in more depth later on, but you don't want holes in your crown board. Trust me on this. But for a bit of ply, 460mm by 460mm, and a run of a 10mm deep strip round the edge, roughly 20mm wide, and you can buy that kind of lath out of B&Q, out of the rack of different profiled beadings. You can make yourself a crown board for probably, at today's prices, £3, even £4. You've still saved £6. Well, I don't know about you, but I prefer £6 in my hipper to not being in my hipper. Again, shop around, watch out for the sales, watch out for the special offers. Keep an eye on the vendor sites, the big ones, Thorns, National, Maysmore, C. Wayne Jones. Join the forums, the Facebook groups, get a heads up on the money saving events. Knowledge equals savings. Going back to the clearer boards, or sorry, mentioning clearer boards, I can make a clearer board probably £3. In the catalogue, it's £24. It's a bit of ply, it's a bit of 1x1. It's a case of cutting 2 holes, 2 little bits of stick, some mesh, and a bit of glue or some staples, and you've made it, you know. And I'll talk about making of stuff and showing you these bits and bobs as we go on. I've deliberately not illustrated it here because it will be cropping up further down the line. Now, the bad news. It's best to have 2 colonies. This is because, and if you read the test frame article, you will find on the Facebook group in the files, you can use 1 colony to check on the condition of the other. Now, that is actually very important. People panic. They look in the colony and they say, oh, I've got no brood. I've got no open brood. I've lost the queen. I am queenless. And the next thing they do is they pick up the phone, they look for a supplier, and they spend 35 or 40 pounds on the queen. New queen arrives, everything's hunky-dory, happy days, go down to the colony, put the new queen in, go and look 10 days later, there's a new queen dead on the floor, right? So that's 35 quid just gone up in smoke. And there's eggs and open brood in the colony. How does that work? There was a virgin. It's very rare, actually, for a colony to be without any queen of any description whatsoever. Serious, serious point. Write it down, take it on board. Very unusual. How do you find out? You use a test frame. Test frame. And what you're doing is you are offering the colony the opportunity to raise a queen cell if they are completely queenless. If they are completely queenless, they'll say, thank you very much. And they will start to feed the larvae with royal jelly and turn them into queens. And to an experienced eye, you can actually see it the following day. The less experienced eye, 3-4 days later, it's very obvious. And that 2-day, 3-day usage of that test frame saves you 35 to 40 odd quid. Now then, let's put beekeeping into perspective cost-wise. Let's say you take up golf. You have to buy clubs. You got to pay for lessons, you got to pay for rounds, you lose balls, you hire buggies, you have to buy a round in the clubhouse when you hit that proverbial hole in one, and how much money do you get back? For the average golfer, none. Financially, none. Yes, they get the exercise, yes, they get the enjoyment, yes, they get the frustration of hitting the ball into the water and into the bunker and taking out the window of the neighbor's house, etc., etc. But, and I'm not decrying golf, I used to play it, but I'm just using it as an example and having a bit of a laugh. However, your 2 hives could, note the could, give you in a season 600 to 1,000 pounds worth of honey. Seriously. On the other hand, you might have to feed them and that'll cost you money. But at least you've got a sporting chance of getting some money back. And I'm saying price at £6 to £8 a pound, which I think is perfectly reasonable because at the moment, excuse me, itchy eye, at the moment, I am selling my honey at wholesale. Into the shops, I sell at £8 a pound. So there you go. Now then, that's 3 supers per colony of honey. As I mentioned, my all-time best, 230 pounds of comb honey. And if you said comb honey was worth £10 a pound, which it is easily, 10 times 230, I rest my case. Sadly, though, not in Scotland. And I say that because those circumstances were down in the Midlands of England, and the humidity level, I've heard about it, I've read about it, but my goodness, you need to experience it to realize how humid it can get. It was like being in the semi-tropics, to be honest. It was that intense. We just don't get humidity like that up in Scotland. And for this person, I will happily say, thank goodness, never mind the bees. But from my personal point of view, it's a bit much. So people ask, how much time does beekeeping take? And that's a very fair question. The simple answer is a competent beekeeper will take 10 minutes-ish to inspect a colony once every 10 days. A bee farmer will take 4 minutes and go on to inspect at least 50 colonies a day, every day. because they're working a 7-day or a 10-day rotation. And a bee farmer, to make a living, you're really looking at 400 hives plus. The biggest bee farmer in the UK, by the way, is Murray McGregor, and I'm proud to say he's a Scot. He works out of Pitlochry, is it? No, it's not Pitlochry, forgotten the name. Anyway, come to me. Murray runs, last I heard, 4,500 colonies, and he's got them from the north of Scotland all the way down to the orchards in the south of England. So you can imagine the amount of bee experience that Murray gets and his crews get in a year. It's massive. A newbie will get lost in oohs and ahs and take an hour, which is not good for the colony. So as soon as possible, try to withstand the temptation and get through them and close up. Location. A lot of people want to keep bees in the garden. It's frankly not ideal unless you have very, very cooperative neighbors. I have a big garden here. I tried keeping the bees in the garden and I moved them out for the simple reason that my lovely next door neighbors, and I'm not being sarcastic, they are absolutely lovely people, but first blink of sun, they're out having a brew in the garden. First blink of sun, I want to be out with a smoker and a hive tool inspecting the bees. So we have instantly a usage of space clash. They have an absolute right to enjoy their garden, and I have to respect that. And because I respect it, I move the bees out. It's not fair to inflict your beekeeping on other people. So you might want to have a think about location. And that effectively for this session wraps it up. I imagine if you're watching this, you're watching it on YouTube. I hope I've given you some food for thought. The next session will be a Zoom session. It will commence at 2 p.m. next Sunday, which will be the 16th. And that's all for now, folks. Thanks for paying attention. Thank you.